The drums called for him. The drums beat again last night. I don't sleep when they do. No one in the village does. We all know what it means. The prince is hunting. The drums aren't loud at first. They are like whispers in the wind, faint and steady. But they grow louder, like they are coming closer, even when you know they aren't. My mother says the drums aren't really sounds, they are warnings. Warnings that someone will disappear before dawn. I've heard the stories my whole life. About the wicked prince who betrayed the gods. About how they cursed him to walk the earth forever, feeding on fear and pain. The elders tell us he only takes those who are selfish or cruel, but that's a lie. I know it is. He doesn't care who you are. I know, because I saw him once. It was 6 years ago. I was 14, skinny and awkward, just old enough to start carrying water from the river. My mother had sent me late that evening, just before the sun dipped below the trees. I didn't want to go, no one likes being outside after sunset, but we were almost out of water, and she was already sick of hearing me complain about chores. Go and come back quickly, she said. Don't linger. I tried. I really did. But the river was farther than I thought, and by the time I filled the pot, the sky had turned that deep red that makes the trees look like shadows. I balanced the pot on my head and started back, walking fast. That's when I heard them. The drums. They started softly, like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. I stopped walking, unsure if I was imagining it. The sound got louder, more rhythmic, like someone calling out a name over and over. I should have run. Every story says to run. But I didn't. Maybe I thought it was just a tale to scare kids. Maybe I was too curious for my own good. I stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of those drums. That's when I saw the men. 2 of them came running down the dead path, their chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. They didn't even glance at me as they passed. One of them tripped and fell, scrambling to his feet before running again. Then I saw him. The prince stepped out of the shadows like he'd been there all along. He wasn't dressed like a prince, no gold, no jewels, nothing fancy. Just a dark wrap around his waist, stained with something I didn't want to think about. His face was painted in streaks of white and red, the colors of war. And his eyes didn't look human. They were cold and empty, like he was watching the world from somewhere far away. When he looked at you, it felt like he was peeling away your skin, searching for your secrets. Behind him were his men. They carried long sticks with carved blades, nets, and ropes. They moved quickly, silently, like hunters. One of them noticed me and grinned, showing teeth too sharp to belong to a man. The prince raised his hand, and everyone stopped. Even the drums stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. He turned his head, slowly, scanning the trees. For a moment, I thought he was looking at me. My legs shook so badly I almost dropped the water. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the bush behind me. I didn't realize someone was hiding there. A boy, maybe a year older than me. I could just make out his shape through the leaves. He was trembling, trying to stay still, but the prince had already seen him. The prince snapped his fingers. His men moved like shadows, tearing through the bushes, grabbing the boy before he could run. He screamed, a high, panicked sound that made my stomach twist. I should have run. I should have left, but my legs wouldn't move. I watched as they dragged him forward, kicking and crying. He begged them to let him go. He swore he hadn't done anything wrong. The prince walked up to him, calm as a snake. He knelt in front of the boy and said something I couldn't hear. His voice was too soft, too low. The boy stopped struggling. He just stared at the prince, his eyes wide and glassy, like he was in a trance. The prince smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. He stood, and his men tied the boy's hands with rope. They dragged him away, back toward the forest. The drums started again, louder this time. I dropped the water pot and ran. When I got home, I told my mother what I'd seen. She slapped me. Not hard, but enough to make me stop talking. Don't say such things, she said. The prince is dead. He's been dead for years. The elders defeated him long ago. She didn't believe me. No one did. But that night, the drums played until dawn, and in the morning, everyone knew the boy was gone. His mother went to the chief, demanding answers. The chief said the boy had run away, that he'd stolen food and fled into the forest. But I knew the truth. The years passed, but the drums didn't stop. Every few months, they would play, and someone would disappear. Sometimes it was a thief or a troublemaker. Sometimes it was a kind woman or a quiet child. It didn't matter. The prince took who he wanted. People started to leave the village. Some moved to the city, hoping the prince couldn't follow them there. Others went deeper into the forest, to places where the drums couldn't be heard. My family stayed. My mother said the village was our home, and we wouldn't be chased away by old stories. I never told anyone, but I started to notice something strange. The people who disappeared, they all had secrets. The boy I'd seen taken that night. He'd stolen from the temple. The man who vanished a year later. He'd beaten his wife. Even the kind woman, the one everyone loved, had hidden money from her family. It was like the prince could see things no one else could. Like he was punishing people for the darkness in their hearts. Last night, the drums came again. I was awake when they started, sitting by the fire, sharpening my father's old knife. The sound sent a chill through me, but I didn't move. I knew better than to go outside. The drums grew louder, closer. Then I heard something else, footsteps. They were coming down the path, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, clutching the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. The footsteps stopped outside my door. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just silence. Then a voice spoke, low and cold. Come out. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Come out, the voice said again. I know you're there. I should have stayed hidden. I should have kept the door shut. But something about the voice, it wasn't angry or loud. It was calm, like a whisper. And it sounded like it already knew I'd listen. I opened the door. The prince stood there, exactly as I remembered him. The same dark wrap, the same painted face, the same empty eyes. Behind him were his men, their faces hidden in the shadows. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and I felt my legs go weak. You've seen me before, he said finally. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Do you know why I'm here? I shook my head, my throat too dry to speak. The prince stepped closer. You carry something heavy, he said. A secret. You think I don't know it, but I do. I wanted to deny it, to say I didn't have any secrets. But I couldn't. He was right. You watched, he said. That night by the river. You didn't run. You didn't help. Tears filled my eyes. What could I have done? I whispered. He was just a boy. I couldn't stop you. The prince tilted his head, studying me. Perhaps not, he said. But you didn't try. He raised his hand, and I thought he was going to signal his men. But he didn't. He just stared at me, his eyes cold and empty. Fear can be a kind of sin, he said. The drum started again, louder than ever. My vision blurred, and I felt my knees buckle. When I woke up, the prince and his men were gone. But the drums didn't stop. They played all night, echoing in my head long after they'd faded. This morning, the elders came to my house. They didn't ask questions. They just looked at me, their faces grim. You need to leave, one of them said. I didn't argue. I packed what little I had and started walking. As I left the village, I could still hear the faint echo of the drums, like a heartbeat in the distance. I don't know where I'm going. But I know the prince isn't done with me yet.